Mr. Turner became the director recently, but he immediately decided to change the office's charter. First, he revised the budget, bypassing his rate. Being a penny pincher, he implemented cost-cutting measures across the board. Many people almost immediately wrote letters of resignation. Those who remained wanted to escape, but continued to endure Mr. Turner's antics due to their circumstances. The biggest problem was finding cleaners. No one wanted to clean floors and polish door handles all day for a meager salary. It was Mr. Turner's obsession. Ms. Johnson, the deputy personnel officer, urged the director to offer competitive salaries to retain employees. Every morning at the meeting, Mr. Turner angrily complained about the dirty office. He almost yelled at Ms. Johnson, "If you don't find a cleaner soon, I'll make cleaning up your job." Ms. Johnson herself was ready to run anywhere from this monster of savings, but she perfectly understood that it was not so easy to find a job at her age. So every time she silently listened to his unreasonable reproaches and demands. At the next morning meeting, he once again expressed his dissatisfaction with her work because cleaners were still not found. Mr. Turner said angrily as he approached the window, "Is it really that hard for you to find a cleaner? There are plenty of people who want to work in a stable company." At some point, he silently froze and began to look at something in the distance. A woman was neatly stacking recyclable materials by the trash cans. He said, smiling slyly and turning towards his deputy, "Are you saying that no one is coming to you? Ads and advertisements are not helping? You see how it's supposed to be done?" He opened the window wide and leaned out. Mr. Turner called out, "Hey, you there, come to my office for a minute. Maybe I can help you." But the woman didn't stop her work and continued to fold the cardboard. The boss was surprised but determined. There was even some excitement in his eyes. He turned to Ms. Johnson, winked at her, and called the guard. He said to the uniformed guy as soon as he appeared, "Bring that woman here, no matter what it costs you." When the woman entered the office, he realized that she was completely deaf. She had a hearing aid, but it was not quite serviceable or very cheap. The woman, about 30 years old, turned out to be very neat. Her hands were clean, as were her clothes and hair. The lack of makeup made her face look younger. Her hair was neatly combed and tied into a bun. Her clothes were old but clean. True, they didn't fit her well, but at least they didn't smell bad. The director apparently remembered that the deaf can read lips, so he began to explain very slowly, pronouncing each sound. "Do you want to get paid? You will clean the office." The woman stood silently for a couple of minutes, looking at the office and those present. She then silently nodded in agreement. This gesture seemed to lift the director to the Olympus of victory. He turned proudly to Ms. Johnson, who was quietly watching what was happening. "Is it impossible to find a cleaner? Maybe you have forgotten how to select staff. Here's a lesson for you." This woman would agree for less pay. "By the way, I haven't told her the salary yet, so I think I can reduce it." But when he saw the incredulous look of his deputy, he apparently realized that even this cleaner would run away for less money, and he didn't continue to push the topic. Lucy, that was the woman's name, began coming to the office long before the start of the working day. She diligently washed, cleaned, and wiped everything that caught her eye. In a week, she made the office unrecognizable. Everything shone with cleanliness and sterility, but this didn't win her favor with the team. Almost every second employee tried to mock the deaf woman behind her back, laughing at her. Everyone understood that behind her back, they could say whatever they wanted. Lucy's hearing aid was cheap and old. Nevertheless, she sometimes heard some jokes addressed to her, but there were so many difficult moments in her life that she could well close her eyes to offensive words. Each time she thought only that the sound would soon end, and she would return to her quiet little world where no one would offend her. After work, she hurried to the outskirts of the city where there was an old abandoned shed with a roof. She lived there lately, but not alone. Every time Lucy saw an unfortunate cat or dog, she couldn't ignore them and took them to her little home. 2 different kitties and a dog were always waiting for her return. She was ready to listen to ridicule in the office just for the sake of her pets. Now her household could sometimes feast on some kind of poor or inexpensive sausages, in addition to bread and cheap milk. Lucy could drink water herself with a piece of bread in the evening, but she spent the money she earned on something tasty for her pets. Their loving glances quickly brightened up a hard-working day. Ms. Johnson was pleased with the executive and cleaning lady. The office literally shone with cleanliness, despite the employees continuing to mock the unfortunate woman behind her back. But the most surprising thing was that the director was still dissatisfied. It turns out that Lucy didn't justify his hopes. True, he couldn't even explain to himself what he expected from her. But every day, the silent woman with very intelligent eyes began to win the favor of her colleagues. Even those who recently made fun of her realized that Lucy didn't always wander through garbage dumps. Her speech was concise but very competent. She could sometimes say phrases that made even educated people think. Sometimes they got the impression that she understood a lot but didn't show it. At this time, the office's performance, and particularly the director's, began to decline. Mr. Turner chastised everyone every morning, as if looking for someone to blame for his failure as an economist. The branch's performance began to fall catastrophically. The embedded director fired several people almost every day. Employees talked behind his back that he would soon be alone in the entire office. The company owner, Mr. Anderson, increasingly visited with checks. He didn't like that this branch had sunk to the very bottom in a short time. But every time before the owner's arrival, Mr. Turner intimidated employees with all sorts of threats. His goal was to create the perfect picture. However, Mr. Anderson, who had achieved everything himself by the age of 35, was not going to lose a developed business. He saw that some kind of heavy atmosphere literally hung in the air at this office. When he arrived again, Mr. Anderson stated that sanitization was being carried out in all branches and all employees were entitled to a paid day off. While all the employees, including the director, were resting, the office was in full swing. Video cameras were installed in each room and connected to the owner's computer. Of course, only he and the video surveillance company knew about this. Mr. Anderson really wanted to know what was going on in this office. Therefore, he went to such lengths to figure it out and save this branch of the company. Every day from morning until closing, he monitored what was happening. Slowly, he collected facts, pointing to the reasons for the branch's decline. One day, Mr. Anderson was very surprised when he saw an amazingly well-written business development plan during one of his meetings. He skimmed through the material and looked up in surprise at Mr. Turner. "Who did this?" Mr. Turner realized that the owner was interested in the material, so he modestly lowered his eyes and said, "I tried very hard. I didn't sleep for several nights, and I was sure that you would like it." The first thing that confused the owner was the clearly feminine, neat handwriting. He had already read the explanatory notes of the failed director several times and knew his clumsy handwriting well. In addition, he had learned that this man's mind was as convoluted as his handwriting. Mr. Anderson decided to watch the video recordings. He wanted to see who made this plan. The owner was very surprised when he noticed how the cleaning lady worked on these materials almost until the morning. She was immersed in her work. Either she thought for a few minutes or quickly began to write. It was evident that she didn't even keep track of time. At the same time, the woman drew graphs so easily and quickly as if she had been doing this all her life. The next morning, Mr. Turner was called into Mr. Anderson's office and stood like a boy, his eyes on the floor. The business owner was angry. In the office, everyone was sitting, afraid to move and get under his wrath. "Do you understand that you almost destroyed my branch with your lies and fraud? In addition, I am shocked by how many employees I have lost because of your rudeness. You fired all the best people, but when you tried to appropriate other people's work, I couldn't stand aside. I hope you have 10 minutes to pack your things and leave the walls of my firm once and for all." The former director immediately headed towards the exit, hunched over and turning pale, but he still managed to hear how Mr. Anderson asked the secretary to invite the deaf woman who cleans the office. When Lucy timidly entered his office, he gestured to the chair in front of him. "Sit down. I want to know your true story because you are very smart and have not lived like this all your life." The woman, a little bewildered, made it clear that this was true. Being deaf but not dumb, she began to talk in a low voice, staring somewhere out the window. Lucy was born into a very poor family, but from childhood, she loved learning new things. She diligently did her homework herself when her parents in the next room drank alcohol and fought. From the 3rd grade, she found a secluded corner in an abandoned shed not far from their apartment. Until graduation, She did all her homework there when her parents were drunk. In the morning, she quietly ran home to get clothes and a briefcase while her parents were sleeping and ran to school. Despite such conditions, Lucy was able to graduate with honors and without any problems entered the College of Economics. All teachers loved the smart and purposeful student. She was ready to help her fellow students at any moment. No one had any doubts that Lucy would receive an honors degree, and it happened. Economics was her favorite subject and became her lifelong dream. There, she met her first love, Brian. He was a year older. When they saw each other in the corridor of the university, they knew at first sight that they fell in love with each other. Brian was from a very wealthy family, and his rich parents were categorically against a smart but impoverished daughter-in-law. The feelings of the young couple were so strong that Brian proposed to Lucy, saying that he wanted to be with her all his life. Soon they went to visit friends outside the city. The mood was great, especially since they were supposed to get married in a week. They had to drive a bit to the country house where everyone was already waiting for them, but suddenly a very thick fog descended. Visibility was poor. They didn't even understand at what point the headlights of an oncoming car shone directly into their windshield. A terrible screech of brakes and emptiness. When she regained consciousness, she was in the ambulance. Lucy immediately began to ask how her fiancé Brian was feeling. She fainted upon hearing that he was no more. When she woke up in her hospital room, she immediately knew that something had changed in her life. From that moment, she stopped hearing. Doctors couldn't explain the reason for her sudden deafness and blamed everything on stress. She begged the doctors to let her go to Brian's funeral despite her hearing loss and difficult mental state. But she was not allowed to approach his grave. Brian's parents blamed her for everything and said that if it weren't for her and her poor friends, he would not have gone to that country house. His mother literally hissed, almost throwing her fist at her. "I'll make your life hell. At best, you can only get a job as a janitor, not an economist. You will cry regretting that you killed my son." The poor girl regretted at that moment that she didn't die instead of Brian because no one needed her anyway. Her mother changed partners frequently and soon burned down their house. Lucy was left with no work, no home, no loved one, and no hearing. It was impossible to earn money since no one hired a deaf and fragile woman. She began to learn to read lips and eventually earned some money by cleaning at the local market, allowing her to buy a cheap hearing aid. Of course, it didn't make the world the same, but some words could be caught. Since then, she had been a wanderer. She found a small shed in which she began to live. Despite everything, she didn't seem to complain about life. Her beloved pets were nearby, and they were the most grateful companions for her. Lucy added that when the cold comes, her pets freeze because the abandoned shed is not heated. Even at that moment, she was not talking about herself, but about her pets. At the end of the story, Mr. Anderson remembered that terrible accident. He was familiar with Brian and was very shocked by what happened. On the same day, he appointed Lucy, with her background in economics, as the interim director of the branch, and he didn't regret it. The branch's business quickly improved. Soon Mr. Anderson began to come to the office frequently to pick up Lucy from work. A few months later, the news of their marriage was no secret to anyone. The best gift for Lucy was a document stating that she was now the owner of a shelter where all her pets were placed after she moved in with her husband. In the near future, she would definitely not have time to look after them at home. She happily prepared to become the mother of a baby. The doctor said it would be a boy, and Mr. Anderson's joy literally overwhelmed him. Additionally, either due to an overabundance of joyful emotions or some hormonal changes, Lucy unexpectedly regained her hearing and became a fully functional person. The big, spacious house of the businessman was now filled with the smells of homemade food, an atmosphere of love and peace. Dear viewers, if you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day.